I believe it's probably the most important metric because it means you found the right customer with the right message and everything was authentic. And mobile just eventually made me comfortable with raw, rapid change. I check in with every employee and I ask stay interview questions amongst other things. One of which is, why do you continue to work here? And flexibility is probably one of the most commonly given answers over and over and over again. New York is competitive, it's direct, it's expensive. There's no room for mediocrity here.
Welcome to the New York Leader, conversations with New York CEOs and founders about how they grew into leadership, often by taking unconventional paths. I'm George Janson, an executive coach and Vistage chair in New York. This podcast is an extension of the conversations I have every day with leaders across New York. Honest discussions about what's actually working, what isn't, and how leadership evolves as the stakes rise. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to the New York Leader on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Today's guest is Michael Batiste. He's the managing partner at 580, a growing commerce-focused agency helping brands connect marketing, sales, and digital to drive growth. We talk about leadership, learning, culture, and what it really takes to lead a company in New York. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, George. Happy to be here.
Before we jump into the business, Mike, I like to start with how leaders think and learn. And Mike, you're probably one of the most avid readers that I know. So I'm curious, what are a few books that really shaped how you think as a leader today?
Well, that's a great question. I feel like that's a revolving list. But there's definitely some that I keep going back to. And believe it or not, they're probably more tactical than anything else. So I will answer your question, George. But before I do, I think the things that shape me as a leader, I feel like I take in those books, I talk about them with other, professionals and leaders, and then like you take what you get from that book, and more times than not, I kind of leave it there. I find that when I go back and I revisit, like, oh, here's what I got from Atomic Habits, or a book that's like that, like the behaviors of a leader. Or if I read a biography about, some famous business leader, I find that if I go back and I reread those, that there was just like huge parts that I missed or that I've evolved a little bit as a leader and I'm reading it differently. And I'm almost happy to kind of just take what I get from it in that moment in time and keep moving. But things that are a little bit more tactical. So yeah, whether that's a book about EOS or it's a book about operational excellence, those kind of things I will go back and reread. So like currently I keep going back and rereading The Boutique. It's this great book about independent advertising, marketing, and PR agencies, which is what the company that I run is. And it comes at it from this perspective of, it's written by the owners of a consultancy that value these companies, that help other companies acquire them. So it's just really X's and O's. And as someone who's really in charge of what we measure, how we measure it, and what our goals look like, I like to think of it from that perspective because I could get a little too pushed into like what our clients want, what our people want. And it's great to have this idea of like, hey, if we just build this thing with like the metrics that the industry uses to value a company, we consider those, then we're kind of holding ourselves accountable to something greater than what I might, pick and choose on an annual basis. So I like to reread a lot of those types of books to kind of keep myself probably more for accountability reasons than anything else.
Have you ever stopped reading a book?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I 20 pages in, 200 pages in, but I'm kind of quick to do that in all aspects of my life where if something really isn't serving me or doing what it was intended to do, you just got to pull the ripcord and get out of there as quickly as you can.
I guess that goes with being an adrenaline junkie, which we're going to talk about later in this podcast. So we'll come back to that. So I'm interested, Mike, what's on your nightstand right now?
Right now, there's like 3 books. There usually is, 3 that I'm ready to read, and then if it kinda pops up somewhere else or somebody makes the recommendation, that'll bump one up to the top. Um, I had a big conference coming up, so I got a nice long, flight to the West Coast and then back, get some good reading done, followed by some time off, so possibly could get through all 3. But next up for me is, Gino Wickman's Rocket Fuel, Patrick Bet-David's Choose Your Enemies Wisely, which is one that I actually don't really know anything about. And then I'm really excited about Michael Lewis's Who is Government.
Do you read the actual book itself, the printed version, or are you more a guy that listens or has a Kindle?
Yeah, I mix it up. I don't use my Kindle anymore. I don't even know which version I have. But I mix it up. I actually will do both from time to time. So, like, every book that I read, I have the physical version of, even if I get it digitally so that I can go back and I find it easier to reference and mark up. But there's also times where, like, if I'm really in a time constraint and I wanna get through a book because it is tactical and it pertains, at least I think it pertains to something that I'm working on, I will put that sucker on, like, 2.5 speed, which you could barely hear, but if you're also looking at the words, you feel like you're, a character in a movie flying through reading as quickly as you can. So I couldn't do either one of those individually that fast, but together I could, it helps me sort of get through things a lot quicker.
It's nice to know I'm not the only one who buys the printed version. Then I'm laying in bed and the type is too small because I'm getting old. So then I immediately go to the Apple or Kindle store and buy that version as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Michael, let's ground our listeners in what it is that 580 actually does. So, in simple terms, how would you describe what 580 does?
In its most simple terms, 580, we help brands win where people actually shop. So what that means is that we connect marketing, strategy, creative, media, and culture so that brands could like authentically communicate to potential buyers, to consumers online and in store.
Okay. Who are some of your biggest clients?
So we work like mostly with CPG brands in categories ranging from health and wellness to beer, wine, and spirits. We've got some like fast growing challenger brands that might be doing 20 to 50 million overall in any given year. But we also have enterprise brands that are north of $500 million a year companies.
Right. What's the most common challenge that clients are asking you to help them solve for, Mike?
It's somewhere between velocity and incrementality, right? So velocity, sales velocity is we've got we've done such a great job of selling our products into retailers, and we need to get it off the shelves at the same rate because you don't want it to sit there. Because you could, in theory, oversell, and that's not really the problem. But when you do a good job and you get, a retailer to commit to a big purchase, you're then partially or mostly responsible for helping the velocity of those products to get off the shelf. Incrementality is selling more than you sold last year, selling more than you're gonna sell without doing marketing, and to me, that's the most important, or that's the best one because it's measurable, and we like being associated with that measured success because it takes a lot of the subjectivity out there. I mean, I think back to, maybe it was 10 or 15 years ago, I was at, this, like, big brand leadership conference, and I was in one room watching the CMO. I believe she was the CMO. Yeah, I think she was the CMO of Taco Bell talk about how their huge year that they just had was because they from a brand perspective, branched out and they started doing these Taco Bell cantinas, which were like upscale Taco Bells that people were even getting married at. And it created all this buzz. And there was all this like, additional impressions and earned exposure. And they were super stoked about it. And that was responsible for like this whopping double digit 22% growth that they saw year over year or from the last year to this year. And it was like this great, compelling, presentation. It was absolutely wonderful. In fact, I think it was like the keynote on one of the nights. And the next morning, I was in like a breakout session with the like somebody who works in innovation at Taco Bell, who was explaining that they saw this wonderful 22% growth, because they brought the not chalupa, but they brought something back that had not been there for the last few years, stuffed crunch burrito or something like that, and there was, like, this the research showed there was a demand for it, and it was just like, wow, like, all this subject nobody knows where this stuff is coming from, and that was then and this is now, and at least from a marketing perspective, we've got a really good handle on the value that we're providing, and that's instrumental in knowing what you should be doing, what is currently working, where it's not working, because, people in different locations who are interested in buying different things, who are shopping with different behaviors, their different things work at different times. So you have to really have your finger on the pulse of that, in order to be effective.
What sort of metrics do you and your clients rely on to know that a certain campaign is working?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it could be anything and everything. I think the most common that we see is gonna be like your sales lift or incrementality. Um, Also repeat purchases, so like which new customers have we brought into the brand who now are continuing to buy? Like, th one, that's an important metric. I believe it's probably the most important metric because it means you found the right customer with the right message and everything was authentic. It's not incredibly hard to sell someone on something that they don't really need, but you're never gonna get that person to buy it again, and brands, for the most part, are not trying to do that. So, when we can sort of make the purchase inevitable with the right message, the right product targeted to the right people who actually need it, and it's going to be better for them or less expensive than the product that they're already using in that category, that's really fulfilling. It's not always the core of what every campaign needs to achieve, but that one is very fulfilling because, we love the brands that we work with, and we wanna help them make customers for life.
So, as you know, I started my career working in advertising as a media planner at Young and Rubicam at 285 Madison Avenue, and I think it's a Radio Shack now or something. But those were like the last vestiges of the Madman era when I started. Do any of the elements of the Madman era remain?
I mean, they do situationally or in some sort of like a cycle. Um, I mean, what we do is so much more focused and targeted. It's way less like, big brand platform, big brand experience, but that does still happen, and that we take that, and that's part of the authentic communication that we have to bring to life at retail. It's amazing if a brand can put up a billboard, put a Super Bowl commercial out that inspires someone in that moment to go and purchase and say, "Wow, that looks like the right product for me. I need to try it or I need to switch. I'm gonna do it." That's great. But, we're pretty busy people, nowadays. We have a lot of distractions that exist around us. A lot of things like, going off and buzzing and forcing us to pay attention to them. Bringing that communication to that point of purchase, whether it's digital or physical, whether you're walking in store, or you're browsing digitally, and being able to communicate those benefits again to a consumer, um, it's, it's different, it's a little less, Mad Men for sure, but I think it's way more appropriate for what society is now. I think what's cool I mean, look, I studied a lot of that stuff in school. I read a lot of those case studies. I had professors who all had some sort of a Mad Men story. Um, and yeah, we it was a world where it was a little easier to understand based off of someone's, gender, location, and socioeconomic state, kinda like what they were responsible for in the house and what they did and what they didn't do. It's just like a lot more social norms. That's not the case anymore. Personally, I'd say good. So it's just about meeting people where they're at, and a lot of different people use a lot of different products for a lot of different reasons, and we switch over time. You talked to me 10 years ago about skincare, and that's irrelevant to me. Now, I probably talk about skincare, George, more than just about it. It's incredibly important to me, especially in these cold Northeast winter days.
Right, and a lot of more men are interested in skincare than ever before, right?
You got to take care of yourself.
So working with big name brands, it's got to be a lot of pressure there. So how do you handle some of that stress, the challenges that big name brand clients, can present?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's stressful in the beginning when you're in that sort of like pitch phase, and if you win it and you're getting to know each other. I think one of the goals is to make it not stressful as quickly as possible, meaning like really build that relationship where there is no anxiety having a very transparent or clear conversation about good news or bad or workshopping something. Like an agency, by definition, is supposed to be an extension of a brand. We're not really supposed to be this siloed other thing, and that's what we teach here, is that, like, if you just imagine you work in the cubicle outside of George's office, and if George leans out and says, "Hey, it'd be cool if we could do this for the meeting in 2 hours." It's like, "Yeah, it's dope. Let's do it." Or if you're sitting there and you get some news that's like, "Ooh, wow, we gotta address this quickly," you just poke your head in there and you'd say it, and, like, that's it. If you can just do that, um, I don't think anything is too big or too small or too good or too bad to, avoid being addressed, like, quickly and openly. That's the goal, right? I mean, who knows? Maybe I just don't have any more anxiety left in my body, and no client is too big at this point.
Well, Michael, I can remember, and I think it's true not only for advertising, media industry, but also for any industry, that clients would say the only time they heard from the CEO was during the pitch and when they were on the verge of getting fired. So, what's the philosophy in terms of keeping in touch, right, with senior clients?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll tell you our like, it's very much at the core of why we even started 580, like, why we exist. It was one of, like, the 5 things that we never, ever, ever wanted to do. And it's this idea of, like, there's a pitch team, and they're amazing, and they're charismatic, and they're incredibly smart and incredibly well prepared, and then 30 days later, you sort of have somebody who's your main point of contact, who's in charge of 3 other accounts, and they're not always available when you need them. We didn't want any of that to happen. So, by policy, um, so every time that we can, which is probably like 95% of the time, we have the people working on the pitch who will be working on the business if we win it, because we want you to meet them that way. So, like, what's interesting about that, or what's difficult about that, is that, I think a lot of the business development and growth at the agency runs through me. And I just cannot be on every status meeting with every client moving forward, nor do you want me to be. I could talk, like, very intelligently and thoroughly about what 580 does and the value that we provide, but, like, boots on the ground, understanding a brand and its challenges, like, I'm so far removed from that at this point. Like, our people are doing that from a day to day, and they continue to teach me things, and it's amazing. I used to be an account person, or I used to be that, but it takes time and it takes dedication. You have to become an expert of those brands. So, like, we're very clear about those things. Should someone get introduced to the agency, a lot of times that introduction will be made to me, and we'll be very transparent. I'll start at that point and any other times throughout the process of, like, the expectations and how often you're going to see someone, right? Like, sometimes we have to bring in our head of strategy to deliver, like, a big strategic report. And he's awesome, and you're gonna want him to be in every meeting moving forward, but that's not realistic. But you have to say those things. If you just communicate those things, you're going to be managing expectations and not run into any of those problems. And, like, sure, there's also been times where, we brought in, like, we had the pitch team, who were the people who were gonna be working on the account, or at least mostly the people who were gonna be working on the account, and we've won it. But then the scope of what we actually thought it was and what they actually thought they needed changes over the first year. So again, now we've set ourselves up to have this, like, really transparent conversation about, hey, this is actually maybe like a little bit more technical work and less like strategic big idea work. So we'd like to change the team up a little bit. And there's generally no issues at that point because everyone has all of the information. It's when you do it in a vacuum, it's when you do it in the dark that, like, you're just leaving the other party to kind of fill in the gaps, and they will. You'll wonder, "Hey, where did that person go? Why don't I see that person anymore?" And they're not just gonna leave that they're gonna come up with some idea, and it's maybe the truth, maybe not. Why wouldn't you wanna just, explain it? And, again, like, it just transparency.
One of the reasons I love doing this podcast is because I really like speaking to people who didn't necessarily take a clear path, um, to what they're doing today and their role as a leader. Your background really interests me, Michael, because you were a star football player, you were a disc jockey, and you started in the mobile industry during its nascent stages. How did all those experiences shape how you show up today as a leader? And if you want, you could take them one by one.
I think for me, sports in general, earlier on always revolved around teams. No individual sports for me when I was growing up. And there I learned like how to be a leader, how to be a captain, but like you also have to focus on your role. You have to execute. Everybody has a job when the play starts, and it's not always to be the leader, right? You might have the ball in your hands, but somebody's got to block or vice versa. And I think that made me really comfortable early on with accountability. I don't think I knew that at the time, or we were throwing around the word accountability, but you didn't want to let your team down, right? You didn't want to be the person who messed up on any given play or in a game. Um, as I ventured out, like I got into broadcasting and radio, and I was on air. And that's wildly different. That's creative. That's putting art out into the world. And that's very isolating. You're in a booth with a microphone. If you're lucky, you've got a board operator in there or you're interviewing someone. But man, 99% of the time, that's you and your thoughts and, whoever you can imagine is listening at that moment. And now to get feedback on that, like to like I was not an artist growing up. I wasn't incredibly creative. So to kind of be like, "Oh, I think this is funny or smart or informative," and then to hear otherwise from your program director or a listener or another, disc jockey who's got some seniority on you, like it's great feedback. But that was not necessarily something that I was ready for, and I think that really helped me be able to be a leader in a very creative led agency, right? Because now I can help. It's not just a matter of the feedback that I'm giving to our creatives, that doesn't happen that often, but, I understand that half of our company is constantly putting work out there that's being judged internally and by our clients, and that's tough. Like, it's just you can't just keep finding people who that does not impact on a daily basis. That's human. So I think that really helped set me up to be more of a leader in this company. Whereas if that was a blind spot for me, I think that would really impact a lot of people's relationship working at the company. Um, and then in the mobile space, I mean, I jumped into the mobile space, like, right before apps were a thing. So it was moving fast, and then the change, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I mean, I was coming out of this antiquated industry of radio broadcasting, and mobile just eventually made me comfortable with raw, rapid change. So, like, today, I lead with clarity, directness, with a ton of adaptability. Um, to use the sports analogy, we review the tape, we look back, we fix our mistakes, we adjust fast, and we certainly don't hide from the scoreboard.
Mike, I think it's true whether it's on the sports playing field or in an office that there's ball hogs, right? People who are all about me, 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 me. How do you manage those people?
I don't. They can't work here, and we certainly had a lot of individual contributors. I've worked with a lot of individual contributors over the years, and we had individual contributors here at 580, and it wouldn't work out for them for one reason or another. And over time, I realized that that was like one of the core traits of the people that just didn't really fit in our culture or were caught like with as much success as they could generate here, they were causing an equal amount of turmoil and problems. And that's just the nature of any company, right? You fit or you don't. And honestly, the responsibility was on us to be bringing in the right people, and I was doing it incorrectly, right? So hmm, while we would be going through our interview process, I was looking for competitive people. That's one of our core values, right? So I'm asking questions about like, what sports did you play? What kind of things have you won or big moments where you lost and what did you learn? And I'm talking like we had highly accomplished collegiate athletes, but they were in individual contributing sports. And at the time, I wasn't flagging that. I wasn't clocking that. I was like, "Oh, this person is incredibly competitive. I love this." And they would come in and they would produce. There was like a ton of value there. But I just couldn't figure out why they wouldn't jive with everyone else. And it sounds so simple to say it back, in hindsight, but once we realized that and like now who we hire, who joins this team, a lot of the same traits, but these are people who have been surrounded by collaboration and teamwork their entire lives. That's so incredibly important because we come from, like, we do have people who are still athletes here, but we also have people where that competitive and teamwork never came from athletics at all. And as you can imagine, as we've all gotten older, we're in all these incredibly different, like, sort of spaces in life and the things that we're into and the things that we're passionate about. But it's because we're passionate about anything, and it's because we're competitive about anything that we all have this sort of commonality between us that allows us to be a really, really good team. So, like, even when we deliver what we think was a super solid round of ideas and creative, and it doesn't, like, work for a client, um there's really no hard feelings on like, "Man, we wasted a lot of time," because we're like, "Oh, no, we don't want that. We want them to love it. We wanna win here." And everybody gets it, everybody who's involved. So, like, we don't have to go back and rally each other as often as you might have to elsewhere, or there's no one saying, "Don't worry, I'll just take it from here. I can do it," which would create, as you can imagine, its own set of issues. So, putting together the right group of people that truly fits the culture, like, even figuring out what that means over the years has been instrumental to where we are today.
Mike, we talked at the very beginning about you being an adrenaline junkie. And so, for our viewers and listeners, you are an avid mountain bike rider. And I have seen the bruises to prove that. So, how do you apply that same adrenaline that you get from mountain bike riding at a very high speed and taking lots of risks to your leadership at 580?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's all pretty calculated. I don't think I'm reckless, but yeah, there's certainly risk. And for me, I think if you really wanna capture my attention, like, there has to be I gotta have some skin in the game, right? And that I'm not alone in that. A lot of people have that. That's also human nature. And, I think when you're coming down a mountain with riding over rocks and stumps and roots, and one thing could be slippery and you'd never know it, or one rock could be loose and you'd never know it. Like, you have to be paying attention. You have to be focusing on where that wheel is going to enter the area of complexity so that you don't put yourself in a dangerous situation. And for me, that accountability, that command of your focus is really interesting. Um, I'm not, and I've never really been the kind of person who gets that like meditative benefit of going on a long run or a jog or something like that. I was always more of a, sprinter, high heart rate, high risk, high reward. Um, Certainly makes me feel a whole lot more rewarded at the end. From a leadership perspective, I mean, I certainly don't think I lead like that. I don't go out of my way to create really risky situations so that I could get a rush out of it, which maybe is why I do it recreationally. But I think a lot of the same things apply in that, like, if what you're doing and what you're offering doesn't really capture attention, and someone on the other side doesn't really have skin in the game or some sort of like ownership in the situation, what would you really expect them to do? So, like, in this analogy, now I become the mountain, right? And it's like, if I'm not interesting enough, or I don't make this challenging enough, or I'm not able to give the employee or whomever what it is that they need to sort of get that feeling of achievement, or get them to that next level, or get them all across the next line, then I'm not really doing anything. We're just wasting time. We're wasting each other's time. And I think we've all seen that professionally and experienced it professionally. We have no interest in that here, where we have a ton of people who are incredibly efficient and effective at what they do. Um, and we respect each other's time to no end. People still need to be led and taught and managed, me included, all people. Um, in doing so, meeting people where they're at, doing so in a way that's right for them, is where I think that analogy probably plays in the most.
So, Michael, I know your company operates in pretty much of a virtual or hybrid environment. So, how do you make sure you're keeping the culture strong?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is like, that's an answer that we are still writing, but man, are we doing a better job than we were in the beginning, right? So, like any other company, quarantine hit, we went remote, um, but we started to grow really fast, and it was a very opportunistic time for us, and we were able to seize a lot of opportunity and experience rapid growth. So this idea of being able to hire people from all across the country and pull from all those different talent pools was, really enticing. So we did it, and we were sort of like, maybe New York will go back to the office someday, and then we'll just have people who work remote, and we'll offer everybody that ability if they want to. And I think, like, our lease then expired. It's the same story of a ton of New York companies, but we just never wanted to go back. We had people who were moving away from New York, that were just staples of our company and our culture, and this idea of, like, I on a monthly basis, I shouldn't say that, on a probably a bi-monthly basis, I check in with every employee and I ask stay interview questions amongst other things. And one of which is like, why do you continue to work here? And flexibility is probably one of the most commonly given answers over and over and over again. Like, we know, we all know what has to get done. And we all know that life gets in the way sometimes. But if we provide flexibility for people to get their work done and manage their life in a way that you want to be able to get your kid off the bus every day at 3 o'clock? Absolutely. We can work around that. And if we explain that to our clients, they can work around it too. And if they're not willing to, probably not a good client for us. Because that's the thing that like people love the most about here. So, like, yeah, I get it. That's certainly not for everyone, and a lot of people can't run and manage a business that way, and that's totally fine. There's also a lot of employees who would not thrive in an environment like that. But I think for the people that we attract here and the level of accountability that we hold each other to, we don't need to have really super tight guardrails, and that helps build the culture. I think the second thing, which is incredibly important, is that we need to have FaceTime with each other. We're never gonna have FaceTime unless we schedule it, but we also can't just schedule to have FaceTime. And there's a lot of tension in that sentence. So we have to find really authentic ways to, like, have a reason to turn on the camera and chat with each other, or pick up the phone and each go for a walk and just have a chat that weren't about, "Hey, we have to present to each other these ideas before we present them to a client," or, "We need to do this one thing, so let's," like, there needs to be space for those things, but there can't be, like, every Tuesday at noon, we light up Zoom and we have bagels together. Believe me, we tried it. You can't do those things. They just don't really work. It'll be me and the same 3 people every Tuesday, having a bagel for 3 weeks until we so, like, yeah, it's been a moving target. Less is kinda more, but you can't do nothing, and you really gotta be careful not to do too much.
Mike, I want to pick up on something you said that I thought was very interesting about having walking meetings. Can you talk about the benefit of that versus someone sitting sedentary in front of a screen like we're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as someone who I walk, I mean, even when we were in an office, if my phone rang and I was on it, I was pacing around, going back. It's just what I do, right? When my head needs to be calm, my legs get busy. So I think originally for me, when I started working from home, I was of that mindset, like, "Oh god, I'm never gonna be able to do this. This is terrible." And I needed to go. I would just start scheduling as many calls as I could for like a 2-hour window where I could walk out my front door, walk around my neighborhood, and just be on the phone the whole time. Um, and that quickly, like, also helped me communicate to our team, like, it's okay. You gotta get out. You gotta change the scenery. Like, we're not in an office where you're gonna walk out for lunch. You're home. When you go to take your lunch, you're gonna do what I do. You're gonna throw the kids' laundry in the machine. You're gonna go, oh, you realize you didn't quite clean up, the game that you were playing last night, and you never kinda get anywhere. "Oh, I was gonna go to the UPS store and send something out today, and it's still sitting here a month later." You gotta make that time when you can. And being outside is wonderful for a million different reasons. So, again, just promoting to everyone, do this, do something different. Hey, I'm gonna go run an errand. Why don't you call me on the phone and we'll chat while I'm driving? So you can still maximize your time, but you also get to be you. Because the last thing we also want is someone like have feeling like they need to sneak around to do that stuff. Like, "Oh, man, I got this doctor's appointment, and I really like, I'm not gonna take a half day off because I gotta get work done, and I'm probably gonna be working late and whatever." Like, you're gonna do the time that you need to get the work done. So just, like, we wanna create a really safe space where people can say those things, like, "Hey, guys, for 90 minutes today, I'm gonna be unavailable, but if you need to, call me while I'm driving." And that, is just way more flexible and fluid.
So, Michael, you're part of a Vistage CEO peer group that I run. When some people hear that term peer group, their back goes up immediately. I can't talk about anything confidential. They can't see my financials. There's no way I have a full day. I'm too busy to dedicate to something like this. So, what's your experience been like, Mike?
Yeah, I think my experience with Vistage has been tremendous. I'd best describe it as it's like having a board of directors that is not really your board of directors. And at the same time, having, overnight, and at the same time, overnight, you have, a dozen great friends who are always going to pick up the phone when you call that are also running businesses that are meeting the same challenges that you are. So, from a resource perspective, it is incredible, and we hold each other accountable, um, and we follow up with each other, and we're talking about really pressing issues, and I think there's a lot of power in what we're not doing that I think a lot of people think groups like this do. And what we're not doing is selling to each other. What we're not doing is having responsibilities to give each other leads and things like that. Look, there's throughout my career right now, it would be great if there was, 10 other companies trying to offer up leads and stuff to me. And those groups are out there. And that's not what Vistage is. Vistage will help you and has helped us run a better, more effective business without me having to go build a board of directors or a board of advisors, which would cost me money and time because they're going to be demanding of, certain reports and presentations. And they're going to be way more concerned if I don't actually follow their advice, et cetera. So there's a bigger pressure on building that board to like, so you get all those benefits without having to do that work. And so like, yeah, if it's a day a month where you go and you work on your business, one, that's just a great idea. But two, compared to how else you could get those benefits, you're saving so much time, right? You're talking about 12 days out of the year. I would say go ask anyone who's got a real board of directors or board of advisors how much time of theirs is dedicated to serving that board one way or another or preparing for that board. And it's probably a whole lot more.
So, Mike, I want to segue to artificial intelligence as our time is winding down. You've certainly been an early adopter of AI. So, I'm wondering your perspective on what you think most companies get wrong about AI.
Hmm. I think most companies probably don't go far enough to truly feel the benefit. And that's a there's a moving line and there's a moving target in there because the platforms are changing every day. Innovation is happening in that space literally every day, every week, major new releases. You can start a conversation with about AI, with a bunch of other business owners, and really quickly you're going to hear six things you haven't even heard before, and they're talking about like it's the greatest thing in the world. Yeah, what do I do with all of that? It's just so much. So it's easy to do less. It's easy to just have ChatGPT, get good at prompting it, training it up a little bit, having it work for you. Everyone should do that. The reality is you gotta go further. You do have to explore some of these other platforms and programs that are popping up and evolving. And you have to look at it objectively. And that is a moving target because you can go too far. You can waste a lot. How much time should we spend innovating? I can't answer that for you, but for the first time in history, you can do all of that without having to have developers and data scientists. You can just write what's in your head in plain English and it's gonna spit out 90% of the thing that you want built, and you're gonna be able to start using it, and that's incredible, and if you haven't gotten to that point yet, you have to go. But yeah, take it from me, it's a slippery slope. I've seen, we've really promoted a lot of this innovation internally in allowing anyone and everyone to, solve problems using AI, do this, report back, let's all learn together, and it's been phenomenal. But, we hadn't gone too far, but I started to see, "Oh, man, we could just be in the innovation stage forever." Like, you can maybe never get past 30% of anything built because of how quick things change. Then you gotta start creating some rules, some guardrails. Um and we've now appointed somebody internally as sort of like the one who is responsible for how we use AI and making decisions about what we do build. So we could still have all the ideas in the world, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on them unless this person says, okay, let's take that idea and let's push it a little bit further. Let's build it out to 80, 90, 100%. Let's see if the value, because like there has to be some criteria. Is it aligned to the business's goals this year? Is it aligned to some of our clients' goals? What is this going to do? For us from being more effective or an efficiency standpoint, and that's been incredibly helpful.
And it's alright to fail, right?
Be prepared to fail. Be prepared to be so excited about this thing that you built and then realize that it actually can't pull the data the way that you thought it is. But then, like, also be prepared for the very next week, here comes this whole new AI tool, which is like, "Oh, you just need to match up something you're building all the way over here with data that you have in 35 different places. Now you can type in that prompt and it'll make it it's insane, but you gotta dive into the insanity a little bit because if nothing else, everyone else is, and you don't want to, find yourself in an uncomfortable situation because, what you do is now relatively automated by someone else in a very, very, quick timeline.
So, Mike, I love that you lit up like a light bulb when we started talking about AI. And something also that was very interesting to me was when you told me about a hackathon that you're having for the company over the next month. So, would you mind sharing that with our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, it sort of it goes back to this idea of we can't just be innovating anything and everything all of the time. We got to have some of this criteria. So as we started to install those guardrails, we thought, you know what, let's just because we do ask anyone and everyone to kind of always feel free to be innovating and looking at and experimenting with tools. Let's just take this one moment in time and kind of rein it in a little bit. So, I mean, like, traditionally, I think when people hear hackathon, you think of like, okay, this is going to be a 6 hour work block or a late night where we're all going to get together and there's going to be some benefits and we're going to try to solve a problem. Similar idea, but adapted for, being remote and how we execute. Which is we've broken our company into teams. Um, each team is currently working on three ideas that are enhanced or fueled by AI. And there's some criteria. We issued a brief. It's going to have to either produce some level of efficiency here, ideally around mundane tasks that no one likes doing, resizing images, changing 1,000 headers when there's, oh, we have to say was instead of when, things like that. or uh, fixing a process or putting something in place where there wasn't a process or whatever. And then they're going to come back to our CIO and present their 3 ideas, and that our CIO will tell them, okay, take this one, do this one for the hackathon, and then give them a few weeks to put it together, bring it to life, and bring it back to present to the company. So after the course of about a month and a half, we should have, I think, 5 or 6, you know, ideas that are being presented, that are mostly built, that are not the same, that are touching on a bunch of different benefits. And that creates for us like this good moment in time to at least draw a temporary line in the sand and say, cool, whether it's all 6 or one of them or whatever, hey, we're going to work on this. And we don't have to feel this obligation to keep innovating and trying a bunch of stuff over the next couple of months. Let's just work on this one thing or these 6 things, whatever we decide. And they won't all make it, right? We'll try them, we'll see, we'll go, and then we can always do that again, and we can do it again, and we can do it again. So instead of this being sort of just like an ongoing initiative, we're sort of just reining it in a little bit and trying to build things for the agency that are, um, we think are going to be just even that much more valuable because more time has gone into the thought process, putting them together.
So, Mike, there's one last question I ask of all the guests on this podcast since we're called the New York Leader. So, what does leading in New York require that might be different from leading in other places?
Leading in New York, I think it requires the speed is on the list, right? Forever New York is associated with speed. So I think it requires clarity and speed. New York is competitive, it's direct, it's expensive. There's no room for mediocrity here. Mediocrity doesn't survive in New York. So you have to be decisive, resilient, comfortable being around people who are very, very good at their job and good at what they do. Um, and I think if you are comfortable with that, you're clear in what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and you're fast or at the very least not slow, then I think you can make it here, right? And if you can build it here, George, you could build it anywhere, right?
Mike, this was a great conversation. Thanks so much for sharing your journey and perspective. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this podcast, subscribe to the New York Leader on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. I'm George Janson. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.